This is the Gutsy Health Podcast with Janique and Tristan Roney. Hey, you guys. Welcome back to the Gutsy Health Podcast.
Welcome, everybody.
We have an amazing guest. This is actually one of my favorite people in the entire world / universe, Miss Morgan. So Morgan Thomas is with us today. And please introduce yourself and tell everyone why you're just the most amazing human being on the face of the planet.
Sell yourself, Morgan.
Oh my gosh, you know that if you know anything about me, selling myself is a really uncomfortable position to be in. Yeah, I've been teaching preschool in Provo now for, I think I'm on my 11th year privately.
Crazy.
I know, isn't that crazy?
What's your school called?
Brilliant Beginnings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just know, like, for some reason your tag is Miss Morgan.
It's Miss Morgan's school.
I know. And it feels, I've had people ask me about it before. Like, why don't you just switch to Miss Morgan's preschool?
Right.
And I don't, it's that whole, my name and something,
Right. Yeah, you don't want it to be about you.
Yeah,
you want it to be about the child. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've been teaching privately now for 11 years in Provo.
Amazing.
And before that, I did my teaching internship, actually my senior year of high school.
Whoa.
Yeah, I got special permission. It was pretty cool. It was just, I had to find a teacher who would be willing to work with me as a 17-year-old.
That's amazing.
So I went back. I grew up in Provo. I went back to my elementary school and approached my kindergarten teacher.
Oh my gosh.
Cool.
And she took me on. So
It's like you were called for this from like 17 years old because I just want to say real fast, you guys, Morgan is a child whisperer. She is so good with children and she understands them, not on like a superficial level. Like she gets them emotionally and spiritually, and like she understands them more than you understand your own child sometimes. And we've had discussions like that because my son Tennyson went to her school, and we've had discussions where I'm like, I just don't know what to do. And she'll say, oh, Janique, it's this and this and this. I'm like, how do you know? So sorry, keep going.
My son Tennyson also went to her school, and I was also impressed by her.
Oh my gosh, I'm so, I should say our son. Sorry. So
you guys are great.
So let's dive into the topic on what we're talking about today. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I've been thinking a lot lately. I mean, always with my profession, but very specifically, I've been thinking about behavior in my classroom and what I'm observing and how things have changed over the last 11 years.
Yeah.
Like what things have stayed steady and what things I've seen more of in the kids. Just how things are shifting.
I think it's really interesting that even in just 10 years, you've noticed changes.
Yeah.
That's not very long.
No, it's not
at
all.
Right?
A decade is nothing in the history of humankind. So.
Well,
right.
And how we came to saying we need to do a podcast together was you basically said to me in a message, you're like, oh, Janique, if you see what I'm seeing right now, 4-year-olds being diagnosed with ADHD, this is common. And it wasn't 10 years ago.
In fact, when I remember when I was, the year I did my internship, actually, I remember being told that it was really uncommon for a doctor, like there was kind of just like a rule that they wouldn't even entertain the diagnosis of ADHD till the child was 7.
And there's good reason for that.
Yeah.
And
So
we'll
what
get
are
into
those
that today.
reasons?
Do we want to go into it right now?
Yeah, why not? Because I'm scared we'll forget. Why in the past were they saying, no, we're not going to diagnose until they're 7. And now all of a sudden they've shifted that. Like what changed?
I think that it's a change in ideas and views. I think there's also something I've been seeing in kids recently, an increase is like an impatience.
Yes.
Kids are more impatient with themselves, with the people around them. And we live in this world where we have so many solutions. We have so many problems and so many solutions that we want to take care of it, and we want to take care of it right away.
Right.
And so I think when a kid is 4 and they're like exhibiting behaviors or symptoms, it's just being jumped on a lot faster.
Yeah.
And maybe that's like a reverse early intervention. Maybe there's like, maybe that needs to be clarified a little bit. Like we promote early intervention for things with kids.
True. Yep.
You know,
But we're not letting these things play out. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, maybe they grow out of it. Maybe there's something going on at home that needs to be addressed versus medicating.
Well, and ADHD versus like speech therapy are totally different areas.
Totally.
You know, like there are some things that early intervention is best.
I'm starting to see a massive shift in culture where we've stopped trusting our bodies. Like we've stopped trusting the process. And like we immediately say, this child is broken with ADHD and the only way it can be fixed is with medication. Meanwhile, maybe that child just needs less screen time, more outside playtime, more connection with family. Because how often, I know I'm guilty of this too. Like, and Tennyson, he's very good with his words. I'll be on my phone and he's talking to me and I do 99% of work on my phone and he's talking to me and I'm on my phone and he's like, Mom, you're not paying attention to the words I'm saying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. You know, and like, how often are we mimicking to them, right? Like monkey see, monkey do. And so
mirroring is a thing in a child's development.
You know what I mean? And so now they're totally okay on technology and they're not getting the interaction and the movement that their body needs for growth, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk on more of what you've observed and like, just let's go into this because I trust your observations.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different things that we could cover and talk about, but I've been thinking a lot specifically about behavior and the needs that drive it and how we, and I mean, I'm speaking to my personal experience as a parent, but also as an educator, how we tend to focus on the behavior rather than the need underneath it.
Yep.
And when we're talking humans, but specifically kids, every behavior gets them something. I don't mean that necessarily negatively or positively, but they behave the way they do because they're getting something from it. Like you have a child who is really impatient with themselves and throws tantrums and takes things from other kids. They're behaving that way because somewhere in their life that's working for them.
Yeah.
And they need to see other ways to get to where what they're aiming for. Does that make sense? More healthy.
Can I give an example that I've seen in our own household? So we'll sometimes with our kids, we can talk about whether this is a good idea or not. We put them in timeout, right? And particularly in our house, timeout is in mom and dad's bedroom. And almost without fail, you can guarantee that we put one of the kids in there and they're really mad, they're going to hurt themselves. They bonk their heads. They accidentally kick the corner of the bed, whatever it is. And then they start crying. What's so fascinating to watch is that immediately the energy goes from we're upset with you, you're in trouble to, oh no, let's fix this. Let's take care of it.
Yeah.
And because that pattern has taken place in the household, it's like taken root every single time now. The kids go in that room, they get hurt within 2 minutes of it.
That's true.
Yeah.
And that's
less than 2 minutes. It's like 30 seconds.
Maybe. Yeah. But it's a perfect example of that need fulfillment process of what they need is for mom and dad to not be mad, for mom and dad to take care of them.
And this is how I got there first time, maybe the second time. So now I'm just going to intentionally, it's like a pattern.
They're very intelligent. They're very, very intelligent and they know how to get their needs met in what has been the most effective way for them. Yeah. We get frustrated because it's not convenient for us, but we don't realize that we're contributing to how it's playing out. Right.
Yeah,
totally.
I don't know. A situation in preschool comes to mind when I'm, thinking about the needs and the behaviors. So in my classroom, I see myself as more of a guide than I do a teacher.
Yeah.
I see myself, like my responsibility is to facilitate experiences, rather than instruct and control, and inform, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And part of that is creating a safe environment for the kids. And I had this, situation not too long ago, with a group of girls. They were across the room and they were playing with some toys. And I was listening, just kind of seeing they had some conflict and they were trying to work it out. And one of the little girls took the thing that they wanted from the other one. And then that one came up, and was approaching me to come tell me about it. And before she even addressed me, I looked over and I saw this other little girl. And immediately, I'm totally going to start crying. Immediately, I could see her countenance change. She tensed up, but she also she got a little defensive.
True. Yeah.
And just this other, this peer coming up to tell the teacher about something that she had done was it brought tears to her eyes, and she started crying immediately. And I stood up from my stool, and I walked over to her, and I just thought, I'm just going to take a pause. And what if instead of doing this the way that I was trained to do in school, or the way that has kind of just always been the way things are done, you help the victim, you address the bully. What if I changed the way I addressed it? What if instead of jumping right into what her behavior was in that scenario, what if I just picked her up and hugged her and told her that I loved her without any mention of the conflict at all? And I did that, and I went over and I wrapped my arms around her and I told her I loved her, and her whole body softened. And she stopped crying. And we had a moment where she knew that was the underlying need, right? Rather than shame.
Yes. Yes.
And then as she calmed down, we addressed the conflict, with the other kids. And I thought it was interesting, this peer that had come to tell on her, so to speak, didn't have any, she didn't oppose me being kind to this friend. There was no need for punishment or reprimand for any of those kids.
Yeah. Just connection.
Does that make sense? It's not like they were, maybe I'm not explaining that exactly how I mean it, but you get some kids sometimes where they want justice.
Yes. Yes. All of them
we have
do.
this policy in preschool, are you coming to tell me about it because you need help or somebody's not safe, or are you wanting to get somebody in trouble?
Right.
Are you trying to
you want revenge.
Yeah. And we work through that and we avoid that because it's not healthy.
Right.
But in this particular scenario, these girls, they were friends. They cared about each other.
Yeah.
And that, that friend wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't like she needed me to address her as the victim.
Right.
Then she watched me model kindness and compassion to the person that had offended her.
Right.
And we worked it out.
Yeah.
So, it kind of is just a shift in perspective on
their
the
behaviors.
Here's what I think is awesome about that is that you paused.
Yeah.
Right? And when you paused, it gave you suddenly the power to choose other than what your natural reaction would be.
Yes.
And we don't get enough of that in our homes, much less in society as a whole.
Yeah.
Society is very reactionary. I mean, the whole conversation around bullying in schools is very, very reactionary. And all they really ever say is stop bullying. Don't let bullying happen.
Yeah.
No tolerance, period, for bullying. We're going to kick them out of the school as soon as they do it. Nobody stops and says, okay, what's the need that is going into this in the first place? How can we address this with the bully so that they don't feel the need to
and
ultimately
what's the goal? What's our aim? Is our aim to is it justice?
Right.
Is it, you know what I mean? Are we teaching this law of human interaction? Or, I when we're dealing, with kids specifically, but even in adults, I think, when we're dealing with a bully or a victim, the needs underneath are equally as important.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to focus because you meet the need and the behavior changes.
Yep.
You get that result in the behavior change without having, does that make sense?
Total sense.
Makes sense.
I feel like with every situation that we do, like hard situation in the world, if we just met it with more love and compassion, we would solve more problems versus hardness and, defensiveness or punishment or anything like that. And that goes for adults as well. Yeah. Right. If we all just responded from a place of love and understanding.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is not the same thing as saying there shouldn't be consequences.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? Because there are consequences. There are natural consequences to everything we do.
Yes.
And there does need to be a restoration when something has been damaged. Right. But that doesn't mean that we have a black and white code of laws where
that
we say,
drives us.
Here's your crime, here's your punishment, and we are going to be dispassionate enforcers of that.
Totally.
Yes,
right?
I think the key in that is the word natural. natural consequences.
Yes.
I mean, obviously enforcing laws in some areas, it has its place.
Well, we
when
need
we're talking
safety
the
and the
legal
expectation.
system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. When I think about in my classroom, I think like the ultimate goal is to help these kids develop and go out and contribute to their community.
Yeah.
And I want my work to be focused on a community that's not governed by justice, but more accountability.
Yeah.
I think that there's a difference, that personal, when you can teach a kid to take accountability,
Yes.
be accountable for those actions, but you do it in such a softer approach.
Totally.
Less shaming.
Totally.
Sure. We could do a whole episode
right?
on what justice is and the different forms of justice.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right that sending people out there with this cold, hard idea of you have to do everything right or you're going to be punished, that creates the defensiveness and the callousness and the disconnection that really prevents our society from being what we want it to be.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I am curious though, you mentioned your goal of, sending children out into the community to be good contributors or whatever the word is that you used. What do you believe needs to be in the classroom in order for that to happen? What do you strive to create in terms of the environment?
What are you seeing missing in their environments?
That too. But first, what should be there? And then, what
Man, that's a loaded question because there's a lot that goes into it. We could talk like how I gear my curriculum toward, exploration and that kind of thing. But if we're talking emotions and behaviors, to be honest, I've thought this over as we prepared to talk today. And I really feel like everything has just picked up pace.
Yes.
Everything seems to be moving so quickly. Kids seem to be moving so quickly. And I catch it. I am a busy body for sure.
We're all so guilty of that.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it's interesting. We talk about personal experience. I definitely, as a kid, probably could have been diagnosed with ADHD. I never was. And then even early on in my career, the way that it was, teachers handled me in a classroom, and the way that I was taught in the first years of my career was you have a busy brain, you give it something to do.
Yeah.
You have a kid who wants to go, like give them something to
go
do.
with.
Yeah. And it took me, gosh, I feel like this is even just something recently that I've learned. And to realize like, whoa, that might be the exact opposite of what I needed. Right? Like I have a busy brain. Like the last thing I need to do is give it something to do.
Feed the busyness.
Yeah. I need to figure out how to slow it down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talk mindfulness. We do a lot of mindfulness in preschool. And I know that that's like a super trend right now.
It's so hot.
Everybody's talking about mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Can I add something to the busyness and what I think we're seeing in children today? I have a very strict rule. When we're driving in the car, the kids are not on iPads. They can look out the window.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They can look at what's going on, like just slow their minds down. And they're really good at that. How often do we get in a car and we put iPhones and iPads in front of children?
Absolutely.
Like we're not allowing them to just sit and be still. Like they're not practicing it anymore.
All the family cars these days have the screen built into the car, right? So it's just, that's what you do. You get in the car, you turn on the show.
Man, we could do a whole episode on screens.
Yeah.
Like how that trains a brain to be distracted.
Well, and that's why I think we're seeing a lot of ADHD in children is because we're feeding this tendency in the brain, right?
Yeah.
And then we're saying, look, it's broken. It's like, no, you've trained the brain to come to this.
Yeah.
Like we're never switching off screens. We're never dimming down lights. At nighttime, how many homes have bright lights on, TV is on, iPhones are blasting, iPads are blasting. And so the brain has been tricked to stay awake and stay active. And then we're like, well, now we got to medicate the brain. It's like, no.
To slow it down.
To slow it down. It's like, no, we slow this brain down naturally. We dim down lights. We say goodbye to iPads at a certain time of day. We allow our bodies to sync with the sunset and the sunrise because it was designed to do that. Light is a chemical in the brain. You know what I mean? You expose your eyes to light, it creates chemicals that stimulate the brain or shut the brain down. You know, it's like, we don't need medications to do this. We just need to create boundaries, right?
Our kids need us.
Yes.
They need their parents. They need their teachers. They need someone to help them learn how to do that.
Yep.
And I am thinking, oh gosh, I actually have, mindfulness is really hard for me. And it takes a lot of work for me. It's taken a lot of practice doing it. I remember when mindfulness was first introduced to me in relation to my ADHD tendencies. I was sitting on my therapist's couch, and he asked if we could do a mindfulness exercise, and I was like,
oh no.
I was like, all right, like let's do this, right? We started, and I was like, I cannot do this. Like, this works? Like, no, like, I was like, I'm so skeptical. And he would say, like, thoughts come into your head, recognize them, and then let them go. And I was like, like, why let them go when I could just chase them in circles in my head all day? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But something that was really, really eye-opening for me and humbling to me was how much work it has taken. And how hard I've had to work at it, simply slowing down, recognizing my thoughts, letting myself be in a moment and feel whatever it is that I'm feeling has taken a lot of work. And I think that there's something that plays into our avoidance as parents with our kids. We have a kid and their behavior is urgent. They're acting out in school, or, we have this need. We want to help them, but we try these things and we're like, oh, it's not working. Like, it takes time to remap. I've had 36 years of my brain constantly going, to undo those like patterns and maps in my head and learn to really slow down is hard. And I think that the same could be said about kids when it comes to mindfulness or nutrition. It's not always an instant. It's something we have to learn to be patient.
But that's impossible in today's society. Because like you said, we're going faster and faster. We want things now. It's, and that's not, how often are we okay letting our kids be bored? Every time Tennyson's like, I'm bored, I'm like, that's good. You'll get creative. We don't allow kids to be bored anymore. How often do kids go out and get dirty? It's like, we enroll them in like piano lessons and karate and, what happened to, I'm not going to enroll my kid in anything. I'm going to let them go outside and play, and they can't come back in until they're dirty. You know what I'm saying?
That.
Like that's their enrollment. Like, play therapy. We've stopped that. And there's a lot of natural movement because, again, the brain connects with the body, right? And our children are not moving anymore. They're not, climbing and jumping and, they're like all of these movements, this contraction in muscles, this bending in joints, like that creates triggers in our brain for growth. It increases BDNF, What is that? What does BDNF stand for? Just remind me.
Brain derived neurotrophic factor.
Thank you. And so we've stopped having the brain grow how it was naturally supposed to grow. And we took something artificial and stuck it in front of them. And now we're creating new neural pathways. Neurons that fire together, wire together, right? And so we are firing new neurons in their brain. And we're calling it ADHD.
But it's not even medicating them. It's not even what we're sticking in front of them. It's what we're surrounding them with, right? It's not just the screens. The screens are probably the latest and the most intense problem, but but it's the whole environment of shoving kids into this room at a school, telling them they need to sit down and be quiet for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
I mean, they've taken recess out of so many programs now, right?
They don't crazy.
The PE is no longer just run around and do stuff. They literally have to study during PE. It's just testing on physical education. We've put ourselves into this terrible artificial environment. And then we say, why isn't this natural human being responding well to this artificial environment?
Right.
We need to put some artificial chemicals into their natural brain so that it can be more conducive to this. And then we wonder why people struggle throughout their lives with depression, with lack of motivation, with no direction in life. Because we have prevented them from discovering their direction by letting them explore the world in the way that's most natural to them.
Well, and just like how you said, like it's unnatural, and now they're having sleep disorders and anxiety, and like we're seeing that in 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Like I probably get one in the clinic every week doing a hair analysis. People are like, my 10-year-old is having panic attacks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this shouldn't be happening as often as it is, you know? And that's just people in our circles. What about like the psychologists out there that are dealing with this more and more, you know, like this ADHD epidemic is a product of our environment and our culture. And we have kind of bred it. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Man, even just for me in learning mindfulness and to slow down, it wasn't until I learned to slow down, and in those moments of really connecting with myself, realized that there were some really intense needs that I didn't even see in myself that are driving these behaviors. You know, like causing me to seek out these things and then wondering why I'm doing all of this stuff and trying to, you know, and I'm still just
going.
Yeah.
And that's taking you so many years to figure that out. When we're seeing that in children, how can we help them figure that out?
Yeah. Real quick, what you were saying about, I was thinking about the sensory activities that I do in preschool, kind of a side note that goes along with it, but I'll get asked by parents or even educators who are new to the teaching world, why I do sensory activities. Like what a sensory bin, like isn't that...
Do they feel like it's a waste of time?
Yes.
Is that what they're asking?
So
what?
I actually remember when we first met you, like one of our things that drew us to your school was you weren't so driven by curriculum. We toured so many schools. I actually enrolled Tennyson in a private school, and he was there for 2 months, and then I took him out because I was like, no, I can't, like, this is all academia. And like, these are children. Like these are children that need to be children. Like we've forgotten what childhood was, you know what I'm saying? And so when we came across your school and I remember you talking about the sensory stuff, and you're like, but don't worry, like we make sure that they keep up with curriculum. And Tristan and I were like, we don't care about that. And
Did I say that?
Yeah. Well, and like, that was like the instant click, because I felt like it was a hidden language of like, no, we're on the same page here. Like you want the same for the children as we do.
Oh man. I have been approached a lot over the last couple of years, for curriculum writing deals and things. And I'm like, oh, like I could take that avenue. And I every time like take 3 steps toward it and like arms up, back away. Like this is just not right.
I think that gets to the very core of the problem in our education system. And really it's kind of how the education system has always been. It's this, we have this set of knowledge that we need people to know so that they can be effective workers. Right? And so whatever it takes to get these people to learn that as soon as possible, we're just going to make it happen at the expense of their personal needs, at the expense of
their
all
own creativity.
And so, I mean, I've heard it's even worse in other countries, not everywhere, but some countries, literally all they care about is, have you memorized the right set of things? Right. And then, you know, we get into certain graduate programs like medical school, and that's literally all it is. It's memorization. There's no real,
it's just like information drilled into
world exploration.
Totally.
And so we kind of break people from the very beginning, and then we wonder why people are all broken.
Oh man, somebody asked me the other day why I chose preschool. And there's a lot of reasons, but I said to her, I was like, I believe so strongly in my philosophy on play and discovery-based learning that I want to work with kids before the world gets a hold of them and teaches them, shame and order and obedience and conformity.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. Like no wonder their brains are freaking out.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to force their brains to do something that's extremely unnatural.
Yeah. And I think it's because you want a checklist, right? Like that's what people want. You want it's a sure thing. Like parents want the sure thing. Yeah. Like my kids got ADHD. They've been diagnosed. Like medication is the sure thing.
Yep.
But it's
but it's not right.
Right. Yeah.
I think,
and behind that, I think it's so vulnerable. Like being a parent is hard. It's so hard. It's hard as hell. And I think that as parents, when we talk about becoming an advocate for their kids, part of that is letting go of that fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah. Yep.
And just trusting that we're doing our best.
Yeah.
We're only going to find solutions to our problem that work if we're looking for solutions.
True.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
I think if we all backed up and paused for a second and thought about, okay, what do I really want for my child?
Yeah.
No one really wants for their child to become a doctor. If they do, that's fine. But what do they really want? They want their kid to be happy, feel fulfilled in life.
Yeah.
Right. And we chase down these things that we assume are going to lead to happiness, like having a lot of money when you're older or being important. But we don't really think about that process.
Yeah.
We don't really think about the fact that doctors are not happier than the average person.
Yeah.
The powerful politicians in the world seem like they're even more unhappy than the average person.
Yeah.
So what really goes into creating a happy human being that grows up into a happy adult and creates a happy world?
Yeah.
And I think your school is a perfect example of how we can do that.
Yeah. Very, we're talking like a goal-driven world versus a value
Totally
driven.
And goals never made people happy.
No.
Sometimes it feels good to check off the box. It gives us a little shot of dopamine, but that's not happiness.
Yeah. And then it's on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And I'm guilty of that. I've spent a lot of time in my life being goal driven and wondering why I'm unhappy and realizing that, when we're so focused, it's like when we're so focused on the outcome of a test, we forget how to enjoy the experience of learning.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where it is. The joy is in the experience, the learning, the growth.
Totally.
Is in the process. Yeah.
I think as parents, you kind of nailed it. We want what's best for our children. And by the click of a button, we can get 100 opinions, right?
Yes,
but
and I
but
talked about this. Yeah.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but I hope what listeners are hearing right now is if your child is experiencing symptoms like ADHD or anything like that, look at your system, look at your environment. We're feeding them unnatural foods. We're giving them unnatural light. We're placing unnatural expectations on them.
And we're ignoring their most underlying basic needs, the emotional needs of what they're asking for with their behavior.
Our bodies and our brains are a product of millions of years of evolution. So if we go back to the basics of the outdoor, the climbing, the running, the jumping. So I remember Dr. Bruce Lipton, he said that the first 6 years of a child life is almost like a dreamlike state. They're extremely, extremely creative and their creativity is their reality.
Yeah.
And here we are as adults and we're saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to strip you of this reality. Yeah. I'm going to place my reality on you. And because you're not conforming to it, you're now broken and I'm going to put you on medication. And this is not okay.
Y'all have seen Mary Poppins, right?
Yeah.
The first one. That's exactly what that movie is about.
Yes.
Right? The
Yes.
bankers trying to force reality onto these children, and Mary Poppins being their safe bubble that says,
Oh my
no,
gosh, I have goosebumps.
your world is exactly this. This is what you were meant to have in your world.
Yep.
And that was before ADHD medication even existed. It has gotten 1,000 times worse. We learned nothing from Mary Poppins. Come on.
Except that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Tennyson loves that song.
It's a fun song.
But what we really
Not
need to
everybody's
do,
perfect. Right?
but you know, like, so us moms, we're stressed, right? And we go online and we're like, okay, how do I fix this? And maybe it's something as basic as slowing down and snuggling your child. I call it snuggling, cuddling your child or connecting with them or like trying to get into their world, like their imaginary state.
Yeah.
And that's where the connection lies. I feel like our kids are pretty good at our kids are extremely vocal, and
ours in particular.
They're very they use their words very well. What's the word I'm looking for? Eloquent.
They're loud.
And loud. But like they will like Satoru will be like, I'm sad you're going to work. Can you sit on the couch and snuggle with me? You know, and like
Because
that's really
you've created that for her.
so I don't know how good we are at that, but really it just comes down to basic needs. Do you know what I mean? Like instead of going on Google and trying to figure out like what's the best thing for my child. And I think Google's amazing, guys. Like don't not do that.
But DuckDuckGo is better.
Like
maybe they don't censor important information.
That's
That's our commercial for the moment. Sorry.
But maybe we just create a boundary with technology and like put it away, like not even have the phone on us and then have real like connection time without being interrupted with Facebook notifications or Instagram notifications.
Well, and we could talk, there's pressure behind that. I see new moms coming into preschool, and I see their intent and I see how much they love their kids and how they want to do right by them. Yep. They want to make sure that they're giving them everything that they need and they love them. But they face a problem and they can get on Google and they can find 15 answers, 15 solutions to one problem, right?
And half of them contradict each other too.
So then, but then there's a backside to that too, that they get hit with that, like, but because there are 15 different answers, you better get it right.
Yep.
Like you have the world at your fingertips, so don't screw it up.
No excuses.
You know? And the pressure that is there is intense. And I think that we get that too. I mean, we feel that from checklists from doctors, pediatricians, dentists, you know,
and school administrators.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Mom guilt is a real thing.
Oh my gosh.
Pressure is a real thing.
It really is.
I think it's also really important to acknowledge that we all grew up in a very similar system. While it's acceleratingly worse, it seems, we grew up with the same deny your personal needs, conform, obey.
Yeah.
And we aren't entirely free of that.
Yeah.
Some people have done a lot of work on it, some not so much, but we're all still dealing with our own kind of self-denial complex and then trying to raise other human beings at the same time while feeling woefully inadequate to do so.
So what I hear here is that we need to like accept that we're flawed.
Yeah.
But also not let those flaws get in the way from trying.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And acknowledge that our own internal state is a very real factor in what our children are manifesting physically, right? Yeah. I've seen in our own household when Janique and I get really busy and we have all these tasks we need to accomplish, seems like our children's behavior always gets worse.
Yeah.
And it's because they feel the disconnection from us and they feel the need arise within them to connect and they're going to get it at all costs.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And we get frustrated and say, why don't you understand what I need? And,
and you know, like, I mean, it's hard to look at yourself too, you know, like I'll see a need in one of my kids and I can almost always trace it back to me, you know?
Yeah.
But I've really learned, especially as my kids have gotten older, I have a teenager now.
How does that feel?
Oh man, I'm getting a lot of practice parenting. Yeah. It's like a whole different ballgame. But something I try to recognize is that often I'm parenting. I catch myself parenting from where I am and not from where they are.
Yep.
And if I can, I've had situations with my kids, with my teenager, where there's been a conflict, and the times that I've handled it in more healthy ways are the times that I've been able to say, I need a minute. I need to take a deep breath, like go into my bedroom, like be with this feeling, figure out what it is that's, that I'm feeling, and then, address the situation.
Yeah.
And I'm able to kind of remove myself, my fears, my worries. 'Cause often when we're parenting, a lot of it's driven by worry or fear. You want to do what's right for your kid.
Yeah.
You don't want to fail them. But I can only connect with my kid when I am in where they are.
Exactly.
And I'm not trying to get them to come to where I am with all of my inadequacies and baggage, you know?
Yep.
So
Totally.
yeah.
It's so hard.
I think that's something we need to recognize too. Like, it's okay to say, this is hard. Parenting is hard. I'm doing the best I can.
It's hard to do it in this environment.
It's hard to do it in this environment.
If we can go back to, the 90s, where everything was a little bit more organic,
Yeah.
Yes. What you're looking.
I'm thinking, I don't know about that.
Why?
The 90s weren't a particularly enlightened decade.
It wasn't, I mean, like, you didn't have instant access to internet.
Right.
You didn't, what I mean?
Yes.
Do you guys remember dial-up? It took like 20 minutes in South Africa, it took like 20 minutes to access the internet. By that time I was bored and I'm moving on.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
like this instantaneous world, like that is being ingrained in their brain. That's being further ingrained in our brains. We're not slowing down to a natural pace anymore. One thing I do want to bring up that I think might be important, maybe a little off topic, but this idea of connecting with our kids and teaching them that their parents make mistakes. And what I love to do with Tennyson, when I have made a mistake and I've reacted and I've gotten angry, I've told him in the past, I'm like, when mom acts like this, you need to call me out.
Yeah.
Because one, that teaches him boundaries, you know what I mean? And then we can sit down, and then he's like, Mom, what you're doing right now is hurting my feelings.
Yeah. It's
and
a
I'm
recognition,
like, yes,
not a criticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it pulls me out of my, state. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I think as adults, we don't trust children to be on par with our emotions. We don't think they can understand it, but that's because we don't take the time to teach them. Right.
Well, and what I see in you, as you're telling me that, is that there's a willingness there for you. There's a willingness for you to,
say I'm human and, I make mistakes. I feel like our parents, my mom was actually really good at this, but most adults back like 20 years ago would never say that they were flawed.
Oh, man.
Ever. It's always, I'm right. You're the child. You're wrong. But we have an opportunity to slow down and teach them, like, listen, even though I'm your mom, like, I make mistakes and we can talk about that. When you see me making a mistake, let's talk, let's figure this out. And you can call me out. And that teaches them boundaries too. So when people are acting out towards them, like in school or friends trying to like punish them or whatever, or emotionally abuse them, they've practiced creating boundaries with us. Yeah. And then they can do it with their friends so that they're not walked over. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's humanizing too. I mean, then it teaches them to be aware,
right?
Teaches them all kinds of things. Yeah. It teaches them how to recognize.
Yep.
I would just add to that yes, we are inviting them to speak up when they see the inconsistency there. We are not putting the responsibility on them to hold that boundary for us.
That's important.
Yes.
Right? It is far more important for us to catch ourselves when we're doing those things than it is to train our children to catch it for us. Right.
Totally.
That's not good parenting to do that.
You can find a balance between that and teaching them that they have a voice.
They have a voice.
Yeah. We have to acknowledge we have blind spots and
we hang out in them.
Other people are much more capable of seeing them than we are. But we also have a responsibility to be working on those blind spots ourselves and not just saying, well, that's just how I am. And you get to work around it, right? Because you're the kid.
Yep.
As early as preschool, those skills, you know?
And so all you people out there who think that preschool doesn't matter, probably matters more than anything else, because that is where you start building the foundation for the rest of your child's education.
Yes.
If they don't learn those basic emotional skills at that age, there's no way they're going to learn it when they get into elementary school and junior high, oh, heaven forbid, middle school, high school, right? By then it's so purely academic that the only space there is for emotional work is how do you shut down entirely emotionally so that you can survive that jungle.
Isn't that so sad? When we should be doing more emotional work during those times, we are being forced to be academic instead of learning like how to communicate and how to like develop empathy, you know, especially during those like young teen years.
So one of the things that we do in preschool, when we talk about emotions, we have this little jar of fuzzies. We made it into a monster. It's like our furry feelings.
Our furry feelings.
And it's filled with colored pom-poms. And each color represents an emotion. And when we gather at circle time, we'll have one of the kids come up and just pick a pom-pom out. Yeah. And whatever that emotion is, we act it out. Or we talk about scenarios where we felt that way, or we might feel that way. We make up stories and kind of get a feel and explore what those roles would feel like. And something super interesting happened last year. I did a little, we started this last year. I realized that kids were super comfortable acting out happy. Or silly or playful or kind or, you know.
Acceptable emotions, right?
Yes, exactly. They could act out jealous, things like that. But when it came to anger, every single kid, the first time I did it with them, every single kid in the room hesitated.
Oh, because of the shame around it.
Not one of them could show me what angry looks like. Not one of them felt like they could stomp their feet and yell until I did it first. And it was like I gave them permission to feel that. And then we could take this even further, but it was just an observation in my one classroom. But the girls in the classroom had an even harder time.
Wow.
You know?
Oh my gosh. That's heart-wrenching.
That brings up a question for me. I have a struggle with this. How do we teach children that it's okay to have those emotions without teaching them that the way to share those emotions is to act on them? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because so in our own children, what I see is that they definitely have moments of anger. Everyone does. But their response to that anger isn't to say, I'm angry. It's to hit or to scream or, you know what I'm saying? And so how do you balance that?
So we talk about that a lot in preschool. Like it is okay to be angry. It's not okay to hurt somebody when you're angry. It's not okay to inflict pain on somebody when you're angry or take it out on somebody else. And so much, it seems so simple when you really think about it. When a kid is experiencing any kind of emotion, all they need is for it to be validated.
Totally.
Like they get in a conflict and they're angry. Like I will have them repeat to me, like this friend or this person took my stool and that's the one I wanted. And I felt mad. That is like literally it. I don't need to offer a fix. I don't even need to say like, here's conflict resolution, talk about the stool. When it comes to the emotions, they literally just need them to be recognized and felt. And then it's,
That's something we see that a lot with Satori in particular. She's so good at that, where she'll be expressing this feeling and then we'll say something like, oh, you're sad because daddy didn't pick the right song on the radio. And she's like, yeah, I'm sad, daddy. And then she's like, all right, well, let's move on now.
Isn't that crazy how simple that is? And it's the same with adults. I get caught up in my own emotions and I think, okay, take a deep breath. What's the need under here? And what do I need to validate for myself?
Totally.
Speaking of adults, it's like we're taught that the acceptable emotion actually is anger, as long as it's like shown the right way. Like it's okay to be pissed about something. It's not okay to be sad about something as an adult, right? It's not okay to be afraid of something as an adult. That makes me so mad. It's not fair. And then of course our children see that and they think, oh, my parents are angry all the time, but they don't see our vulnerable sides because we're not safe showing those.
Totally. Oh man. I've thought often what teenage years for me would be like if the adults in my life had said things like, I don't know, or I was wrong.
I
was wrong.
Like, and then
just modeling that vulnerability.
And then that became what I thought I needed to be as I've gotten older. So then it's like there's this lock on our vulnerability that we have to pick open.
Totally.
Because we've been trained.
Totally.
You know?
And that gets right back to the mindfulness and meditation piece, right? When you start doing that work, you have no choice but to acknowledge those vulnerable emotions.
Yeah.
And if you remain in the mindfulness and meditation, you get to explore those and it's uncomfortable as hell.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
But then it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And you realize that you didn't explode into 1,000 pieces just by looking at it.
Oh, I mean, I have my youngest is super anxious. And the process for her, has been like, let's talk about what you're anxious about, what you're worried about, and recognize that you're okay.
Yes.
You're worried about this and you're also okay.
Yeah.
You know, like you're sad about this, but you're also okay. You know, like we get so caught up in anticipating how bad something's going to be that we don't realize that once we face it, it's not as bad as we think it's going to be.
It'd be interesting if there was like an alternative universe where our schooling system was like the curriculum was all about identifying emotions and connection and like
in Finland
studying.
Is that what they do in Finland?
No,
Are we moving to Finland?
School system in Finland, like they've
got
a lot of things right.
Is that the country where they don't even give kids homework? You know, until they're like 10 or something, you know, because they're busy working on the fundamentals. Right.
Yeah.
But like, if we had like, one of my clients, she teaches, I think like 3rd grade, but she incorporates like mindfulness and meditation and yoga, you know, and if we spoke about our emotions more versus the ABCs, if we spoke about like practice scenarios of conflict resolution. Like, couldn't that be a class in school? Conflict resolution?
Yes.
You know, or like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
I like this last 2 years ago, I took my preschool calendar that I have been told I'm supposed to do, that every preschool teacher does, like the days of the week and what day it is. I was like, I'm spending so much energy and time in our class, like saying today is Wednesday. Like, what am I doing? Like, I rolled it up and tossed it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was like, this is, I mean, there's a time, you know, like this is here in preschool in my classroom. This is not the time for that or the place for that. There are more important things.
It seems like preschool is the last safe learning space left because they don't have as many of the education requirements. And that gives you more flexibility to focus on what you think is important. Of course, you have to get the parents on board, which is probably the hardest part.
I've been
in your
working
case.
to protect it with everything I have. You know, it actually, I mean, I do have parents that I mean, it's hard to get them on board, but actually overall, what I find is that most parents come in with questions and an idea on what they can expect from preschool based on everything they've been told.
Yeah.
And when they sit down and I visit with them and we talk about play-based learning, they don't push back. They've just never had it presented to them in a way that made sense and felt right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So maybe part of that is just pushing for it, educating. And
I don't want to say it's kind of a frightful time to raise children and like teenagers, but it really is, because going back to the artificial lighting, the artificial foods, the artificial environment, you know, and now we're educating.
Manufactured.
Yes. Yeah. But now guess where, you know, so we're not teaching kids in our homes or at school, like how to empathize, how to talk things out, conflict resolution. Guess where they're learning that? On Facebook. I just had that as you guys were talking. I'm like, now
I wouldn't say what they're learning is empathy or conflict resolution.
It's conflict.
But like that's like the only place where those things are like, that's
where
their interaction.
This is where they're learning how to interact with their world, and it's all conflict. And this is where, this is how we are dividing ourselves in our society so heavily, right? Yeah. Like no one, like for instance, vaccines, no one can talk about that in a civil manner, right? Because we have learned to yell at each other on the internet and totally be fine with that. You know what I mean? So now we have this artificial platform that artificial people are communicating artificially. And this is how we are growing our brains. Like this is what we're exposing these young brains to. These are the neurons that are firing together. It's no wonder we have children with anxiety. It's no wonder we have children that can't connect until they're on Facebook. This is why they have panic attacks when you take their phones away and their iPads away. I mean,
they're growing up in a world of extremes.
It's such extremes, and it's frightful, you know, like, and I think there is a very, very big movement, like Sarah Nee's school, the Wildwood Forest School. It's a forest school that they started. And I'm like, we need more of that. Like we need more children, like, and I don't want to say crunchy children because that labels me, but we need to reincorporate crunchiness in our society again, where, you know, where we have curriculums where they're going out into nature and they're learning about nature. And, you know, we're creating boundaries with technology again. And we're creating boundaries with the artificial light, the artificial food, you know, and just like see this for what it is.
And I would say it shouldn't be limited to just nature. It's children just need to interact with the real world outside of the walls of the classroom and the home.
The original world, right? Because our real world now is completely different.
We should let them play with tools. We should. I know that's scary for a mom to think, oh, my little kid's going to be running around with scissors, but they need to learn those skills. They need to have that experience because that's how they discover what this life is about beyond just ideas.
I literally have come to live by a code as a parent. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen in this situation? Like, they fall off that and break their neck, probably intervene. You know, they take a tumble and scrape their leg, totally fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Man, I'll tell you another story. A few years ago, I had a conflict with a student. This kid had been coming to school. It was January, so for 5 months. And it was time for re-enrollment for the following year. And this kid was eligible. And his parents came to me and talked to me about, they were going to pull him from preschool, put him somewhere else. He just wasn't happy. He was crying every day when he was being brought to school. And I knew none of these things because he would come into preschool just fine. But I, you know, at first I was like, I really wish you would have talked to me about this beforehand. Like I could have been helping in some way. I had no idea. But long story short, it boiled down to, actually this child had a problem with another child in class who the parents felt this kid was picking on their kid. So when we got down to that and had that conversation, it was kind of alarming to me how unforgiving they were of the kid that was bothering their child. And when they started to talk to me about it, I knew immediately who it was because I know the needs in my classroom, and I'm aware that there's this child that likes to push buttons. And we go back to needs and what his needs are. So we talked it through. I told her I'd keep a close eye on it and let her know if, you know, things were happening. And like a week later, her kid was sitting on his mat and his hands were next to his legs on the floor. And this other child walked by and stepped on his fingers as he was passing. No. And it was like one of those things where it was like, I'm doing this because I know that it's going to bother you, but I can also pretend it was an accident. Like his intent was not kind. But this kid that got his fingers stepped on, like lost it. It was awful, but we worked through it and everything was, it was okay. We addressed the needs. And I thought, if I don't tell this parent what happened, like I need to let her know. And this parent reacted in a way that really surprised me. Couldn't believe that if I knew that this child was a problem, why I hadn't pulled him from preschool immediately, why he wasn't getting kicked out. And I thought, well, maybe because we don't just throw people away. We don't just kick kids to the curb who are struggling. This kid, yes, there's a conflict with yours and you know, I want to work with that, but this kid has needs too. And what you don't realize, there's a whole thing going on in his life. His parents were separated and facing divorce. His mom was going back to school and working, and she'd been in the home. There was so much change going on in his life that he was looking, you know, he's pushing against those boundaries to figure out where he has control. And when you look at it that way, it's, you can't not be compassionate for the need, regardless of the behavior.
Totally.
I would also add that what do you do to a child when you remove all of their challenges for years and years of their life?
Right.
True.
Okay.
Because
So
there's always another.
So this is the
bully, right?
You know, this is the conversation. In talking to this mom, I thought it's always a trick. You know, like how much do I don't know. But I chose to be open with her about it. And I just said, you have actually expressed some concerns about your child and their resiliency. You know, your kid gets bumped and starts to cry, and you've expressed that to me before, that that's a concern of yours. It's these very situations that are going to help him develop the skills and develop the resiliency. And I think what happens, this is the problem. You don't allow your kid to have a conflict. You don't allow them to be uncomfortable. Then they get down the road, and when they're 7 or 8 years old, you have a kid that's throwing a fit, and you're like wanting to pull your hair out because you're thinking, where on earth did this selfish child come from? Right? Like, I didn't raise a selfish kid. Like, why? What are these tantrums, or what is this behavior? And the kid's not selfish or spoiled at all. The kid just does not know how to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And so this behavior, like these needs underneath it, like his anxieties are real. They're very real to him. They seem small to you. And especially as he's gotten older now, you're like, geez, he's like 7 years old. He shouldn't be acting like this. We should have learned. But the real root of the problem is that he does not know how to function unless everything in his life is settled and comfortable, because that's all he knows. And he can't be faulted for that. You know,
I want to add something to that, you know, for like environment. Yes, we have the same problem with food. And I know this isn't an episode about food, but we as parents, and I see this all the time, parents are too scared to say no to their children when it comes to junk food, you know, and like, it's like, oh, you don't want to eat your broccoli. That's fine. You know, you don't want to eat healthy food. That's fine. Here's mac and cheese. And instead of creating boundaries of, this is healthy food, like this helps your body grow nice and strong, and you can either eat it or you can be hungry. That's your choice, you know? And so we've created these eating addictions in our children, you know? So we've created these emotional issues where they can't be uncomfortable. So we give them a phone, right? Or we fix the problem for them, and they can't be uncomfortable when it comes to food. So we give them the dessert that they want. We give them the junk food that they want. And now we're creating a monster, basically. Not monsters, but we're creating an issue that's going to lead to other issues down the line. You know, so it's what Trungpa called idiot compassion, right? We are feeling compassion. We don't want them to suffer, but we are not thinking about their long-term well-being. We're thinking of the immediate relief from the discomfort. And so we do things that make them happy in the short term, but ruin them in the long term.
So
physically and spiritually and emotionally.
We could take this deeply and say, in that situation, when a parent does that with their child, what's the discomfort that they are feeling?
Yes, exactly.
Like you address their discomfort. And until that is recognized and addressed, the pattern is going to keep happening and repeat itself, and then habits are forming. And
as a parent, you have to also recognize your own discomfort with your children being uncomfortable. Because so often we don't want our children to fail. We don't want our children to be angry. We don't want our children to be scared, because that makes us feel like I'm a bad parent or I'm failing. And we can't handle that. So we do everything we can to make sure that they're happy right now, because then, okay, I'm an okay parent.
And then that's the immediate, that's the immediate solution, the quick fix, the sure fix. Do you know have you ever listened to Adam Grant?
Yeah.
He does the Work Life podcast. He says something a lot that I hear in my head a lot, that we need to stop trying to raise successful children.
Oh, yes. So
Stop trying to raise successful children and teach them kindness. You know?
So getting right back to, what does a parent really want for their child? Success only because it leads to happiness. And if we focused on the happiness and not worried so much about the success, we'd be far more likely to see them reach that.
And that goes back to the value-centered life versus goal-centered.
When did happiness stop being successful? You know what I mean? Like with why
by itself,
by
like
itself.
Enough. When did it
Exactly.
stop?
Well, I would argue, evolutionarily speaking, success was most likely to lead to happiness because you stayed alive long enough to experience happiness.
Yeah.
But over time that has shifted, right? Survival is no longer this really tenuous situation. We're pretty likely to survive, but we haven't shifted our mindset away from be the kingpin so that you can be happy. Just focus on your happiness.
Yeah.
What is going to make you happy to wake up every morning?
Yeah.
And being a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company does not guarantee that one bit.
No.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I'm thinking about the parents who are listening to this. Patience. You got to be patient with yourself. Like when you really look at what you want and what you want for your kids.
Yeah.
You may not figure it out right away, or I don't know, it's overwhelming, but I think it's that slowing down and really giving it some thought and sitting with the things that you want. And then my problem is I see so many different things, and then I get overwhelmed and I'm like, well, I don't know how to change all of these things. So I just spin. So
that actually brings up the question I wanted to ask you. We've talked about a lot of things that parents can do. What are the top three? If someone can only handle 3 things that they can do starting today to help their child develop that emotional intelligence, that peace and happiness in the world, what can they do?
I would say slow down. Like we talked about, learn to be present. Because if you're not present, you can't connect. Every time a parent comes to me and wants to talk about flashcards or writing their name, or they're eager to help their child at home, like reinforce and teach what we're learning. They want to know what they can do. I always tell them, like, forget the flashcards, forget writing their name, sit down and read them a book.
Yep. Or play with them.
Sit down. And if you can read for 20 minutes a day with your kid and have that be the one thing, I have days where I'm a better parent than other days. And when my kids, especially when they were little, I would tell myself, even if the whole day just goes out the window, if I can sit down and read out loud to them for 20 minutes and give them that's beneficial. And we still read. I have a 12-year-old, 16-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I still read out loud to them. We pick a chapter book and
love it
and read. And that's something that we have. So, the benefits of that are huge. But the most important is that time with them and the connection with them, and it slows us down.
So there you go. Really, it all comes down to connect with your children on an emotional level.
Yeah. Strip away, learn to filter through. You get bombarded with resources, and you really do, in order to filter it down and strip away the noise, you have to slow down and think about, you have to trust yourself, I think, Intuition as a parent is a real thing, but if you're too busy and too overwhelmed to sit with yourself and listen to it, you're not going to hear it.
So for a lot of parents listening to this, that could be quite a bit of a project, because it means that you have to start facing some of your own trauma.
Yes.
And start learning how to let down your own walls without completely losing your sense of okayness in the world. So
that's where it started for me. That's, I as a grown adult needed the help of someone else, of a therapist, a good therapist, to help me recognize the things in myself and learn mindfulness. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so simple, like I can sit with myself and meditate. Yeah. I couldn't, I needed help. But the same is to be said for our kids. They need our help.
They do.
They need someone to guide them.
We need our help. Yeah. I think everything that can be applied to children can be applied to us.
Right.
That's why.
That's what we're saying.
That's why.
Did I miss that? Sorry, guys.
No, you're okay.
So for those that are listening, I actually have children walking around right now, and I'm trying to tiptoe. And
that was not very. I didn't mean that. So
no.
Welcome to the conversation, Janique.
I've literally been gone for the past 2 minutes.
So
no, we were just saying that to address our children's, the things our children, we have to be willing to address them in ourselves.
Okay.
The things that we have to be.
I'm all clued in now. Sorry.
You're good.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
So if you have children, if you're thinking of having children, if you know children and interact with them ever, really the best thing you can do for them is to start working with yourself.
Yep.
Start becoming more emotionally aware of what's happening inside of your body and more capable of tolerating that without losing your mind.
And being patient and forgiving yourself in the process. It's hard. It's hard work.
Yep.
Self-work is hard.
Yeah. And if you work on self-work, we'll wrap up. Sorry, guys. I know this is going over, but this is so many good things we're talking about. If you start doing self-care for yourself, your children will model that too. Mm-hmm. They'll start taking care of themselves. I actually posted a video the other day of Satori sitting down and meditating and listening to my meditation with her eyes closed. Mm-hmm. And so many people were like, was that staged? I'm like, no, she is modeling that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like she's modeling that.
Or
like
emulating that.
Yeah. She like, thank you. She's emulating. We're modeling it to her. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you.
I mean, maybe she's modeling it to us. That's actually true.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But when we do our self-care, they'll do their self-care too.
And you're teaching them their value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, you're teaching them so many things, but you're showing them that I value my health enough to put in this work for myself. Mm-hmm. And then it gives them, an example to follow and recognize that they're valuable too.
This was so great. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Hopefully we've given you all a lot to think about.
Yeah.
We started talking about ADHD, but I think we went a lot deeper than that. And that's good because ADHD is only one arm of this many tentacled monster that we're dealing with in society. So
totally.
It runs deep.
It does. You guys, thank you for tuning in. Morgan, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Time. This is so great.
This is just fun for me.
You should start your own podcast, right? Until next, right? Until next week, guys. If you loved this podcast, if you love listening to us, please leave us a review. We love your reviews. It helps us share the love with those, with other people.
If you don't love it, you can keep it to yourself. No, just kidding. Email us. Tell us what you don't love and we'll see if we can address it. But, don't leave a review.
You can do whatever you want, guys.
Because it'll help us when we're mature.
That's
and
right.
we can handle
this. I can handle this. Thanks, you guys. Until next week.
See ya.